Ratzburg, is that a photo, the blow up of a photograph your department took?
Yes.
So your department took Defendant's Exhibit 132, right?
I don't see a sticker on there, sir. Yes.
And this was taken on December 3rd, right, at the Jensen home?
Yes.
Any question about that?
I could check the negatives if there was.
Are you aware of any photographs being taken by your department on any day other than December 3rd, 1998?
Other than December 3rd, 1998. No, I'm not.
You were the only one inside the residence on December 4th, right?
Correct.
You didn't take any photographs that day, correct?
Not that I recall, no.
Is it fair to say this was taken on December 3rd, 1998?
Yes, it would.
Okay. And this depicts where the computer was in the Jensen home on that day? Is that right?
Yes.
And that's how the den looked on that day, correct?
Yes.
Now, let me ask one more question about that. If that door was 3/4 shut and the hinges of the door are on the left side of the photograph, correct? You see that?
Yes.
If that door was three quarters shut, you'd not be able to see the computer, fair to say?
Okay, it's just the way you have it angled.
Well, I saw you were looking
Very
at
good, yes. Yes,
You would not be able to see the computer with it 3/4 shut.
yes.
You seized that computer on December 3rd, and do I understand correctly, you put it in your office? Is that right?
Correct.
It remained there until December 17th?
It remained in my custody from December 3rd to December 17th. I can't absolutely say it remained in my office.
It was at the Pleasant Prairie Police Department until December 17th?
Yes,
In your custody?
yes.
Did anyone turn on that computer during those 2 weeks' time?
No,
And on December 17th, you drove to Madison with the computer in your car
yes,
to see Brad Haller from the crime lab?
yes,
You brought the computer inside to the crime lab?
yes,
Mr. Haller said he did not have the time to do what needed to be done with the computer that day. Fair to say?
fair to say.
You told him that this was a homicide investigation?
Yes, I did.
You told
Well,
him
death investigation.
you told him that you were, and at that time it was a death investigation, right?
Correct.
You were still exploring accident, suicide, homicide, right?
Correct.
You told Mr. Haller you were anxious to turn on that computer right then and there, right?
Correct.
And he told you that to do a computer forensics exam, you could not just turn on the computer, correct?
No, I don't recall him saying that.
He told you did not want to turn on that computer, right?
He didn't want to look at the computer. I called up previously to make an appointment to go to Madison for him to examine the computer. And the reason I did that was because I received a letter from Ted White, and I was anxious to look at the computer, and I took it there to get a professional analysis.
Right. And the professional told you that he didn't want to look at it right then and there.
Yeah, he said he didn't have time.
Right. And you insisted that he turn it on, right?
I insisted that I wanted him to do a cursory look of the computer. That's why I brought it there.
He told you that you should never turn on the computer without first right blocking it, correct?
No, I don't recall that.
He didn't tell you that that was the crime lab protocol, that you needed to make a mirror image of the hard drive before examining it.
No, I insisted. I wanted him to look at the computer. I wanted to search for evidence on the computer. And I was probably a little insistent to him because I wanted to get some answers on this case. And I pressured him a little bit, and he said, okay. And he provided me with, I believe I bought the power cord. He provided me with a monitor, the cable, keyboard, and mouse. And we fired it up and did a cursory look of the computer.
At your insistence, right?
Yes, yes.
And you're telling me that he did not tell you that that was not proper to turn it on?
If he would have told me that it was not proper to turn on and that there would have been evidence somehow manipulated, destroyed, or erased, I was, well, okay, that's a different story then, but I want you to hurry up and look at this as soon as you can. I would have never, if I would have known at that time that I would have been destroying, altering, or any way manipulating the evidence on the computer, I certainly would have been more receptive to his idea that I can't do that. My understanding when I got there was that they were going to look at it and they could look at it and do a cursory look of the computer.
You were upset that they weren't going to turn it on after you had bothered to drive 2 hours to Madison, fair to say?
Well, upset, fine,
Right, you expressed that you were upset with them, right?
yes,
And you were very anxious, as you already said, correct?
correct.
And he told you that that wasn't the proper thing to do, right?
I don't recall that, him telling me that that's the improper thing to do. If that was the improper thing doing, as I just stated, and it was going to affect the evidence, I would have understood.
Well-
But that was not my understanding, and that's why I drove it to Madison on that day at that particular early hour of the morning, because I already made that arrangement on the phone.
Detective Ratzburg, that computer was in your possession for 2 weeks, right?
That is correct.
You'd had training in how to obtain computer evidence, right?
When you say computer evidence, I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean evidence that is in a computer.
Yes,
You'd had training in that, right?
I've had some training, yes.
You had had some training as of 1998 too, right?
I believe so.
And what you had learned in that training is don't turn on the computer, right?
Yes,
That's why you hadn't turned it on during those 2 weeks that it was in your office, right?
correct.
And when you took it up there, you knew that it still shouldn't be turned on unless there's a mirror image made of it, right?
No, that would not be accurate. My understanding
Okay,
is when I brought it up there was that's why we turned it on at the crime lab under the professional circumstances and analysis. If I would have just turned it on and looked at it myself, I would have done that, obviously, as you pointed out. But no, I brought it there under the crime lab supervision and turned it on there with the analyst.
All right. The analyst who told you he did not want to do it that day, right?
He did tell me that, yes.
And you're telling me that somebody, I mean, you know now, you're never supposed to turn on that computer without making a mirror image, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
You've had, well, it's understanding because you've had a lot of training in that, right?
More so since '98 than I did now, or then, yes.
I mean, you've had trainings where that's the main emphasis is do not turn on a computer that you seize for evidence, right?
That is correct,
And
yes.
they've told you in that training that what happens is you lose and contaminate evidence, right?
Correct.
It's a hearsay as to what they told, and secondly, it's irrelevant since it occurred after.
Correct?
Yes,
And that's what Brad Haller told you on December 17th, 1998.
he did not tell me that we were going to manipulate, change, or delete any evidence as we turned it on. I don't recall that conversation at all.
He was reluctant to turn on that computer, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And he only did it because you got angry with him.
No, I think I pled my case to him, and I was rather insistent that I waited 2 weeks to get this appointment, drove to Madison at an earlier hour. In fact, I came into work early to drive there just specifically to have this evidence examined. And then when I get there, he says he doesn't have time. So I was rather insistent, and I further explained to him that this was a death investigation. It's been 2 weeks, and I'd like to move forward with this investigation. And I need to look at the computer.
And so your personal preference, precedence over what Mr. Haller's professional training and taught him. Right?
Objection, Your Honor. There's no evidence that Mr. Haller's professional training was overridden by this detective's insistence.
Overruled.
One more time, please.
Sure, can I have that right back, please?
Question, and so your personal preference took precedence over what Mr. Haller's professional training had taught him?
Well, he never indicated to me that there would have been some type of distortion of the evidence by turning it on. And so we did. I mean, he went ahead and even furnished me with the components so that we could look at it.
Well, at your insistence.
Yes.
Do you have the, what's been referred to as Julie Jensen's log? So we're she is marked as Exhibit 231. Detective, let me use my copy to put some things on the screen, and you can let me know if there's ever any difference between what I have here and your exhibit, but I think it's an accurate copy. Is there any indication in that log anywhere that Mark claimed he was receiving photos in the mail at work between 1996 and 1998?
When you say work, do you mean Barrett or Stiefel Nicholas or both?
Anywhere between 1996 and 1998 that he was receiving photos in the mail at work.
So then I'm clear, Counselor. Between 1996 and 1998, whether Mark Jensen had any photos appear at his work?
Whether he received any photos in the mail at work.
I did go through this quickly, but I did not find any that indicated any photos coming in the mail to his office, or work, rather.
And you don't have any police report where there's any claim that photos were received in the mail at work between 1996 and 1998, true?
I don't recall any.
So it would not be surprising if people who opened Mr. Jensen's mail at work would not have any recollection of receiving any photos in the mail at work, correct?
Sorry, you're saying that the people at work, say that again, sir?
Right. Given that there's no reported claim of Mr. Jensen ever receiving any photos in the mail at work, it's not surprising that people would testify who he worked with and opened mail that they never had such things show up at the office, right? That's what you'd expect.
Well, I have a problem with your question, only that if there were photos at his work being sent in the mail, they wouldn't report it to the Pleasant Prairie Police Department. So we wouldn't, I don't know how you can correlate that. Just because we don't have it on record at Pleasant Prairie doesn't mean it didn't happen in Racine or the city of Kenosha. But I'm not aware of any police reports. So I guess I just can't answer your question because I don't know what they know and what the circumstances were.
I'm just saying, you're not aware of any police department anywhere in the entire world that claims that Mr. Jensen told them that he received photos in the mail at work between 96 and 98, right?
That is true.
And Julie Jensen's log doesn't indicate that any such photos were received in the mail at work either, right?
Correct.
Now, the page 40 in that log,
Yes.
and there's an indication at the bottom of that page, which I'm putting on the screen, Mr. Ratzburg, the very last line there, phone calls to Mark's office and asking his secretary if received postcard, correct?
Correct.
And that's because there was a postcard received at Mr. Jensen's work, correct?
I'm not aware of one.
What's that?
I'm not aware of one.
Let me show you Exhibit 20. And the last page of that exhibit is a postcard, correct?
Yes.
You recall that postcard now?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And you sent that postcard to the crime lab for analysis, correct?
I'm aware that it went to the crime lab for analysis. I'm not absolutely sure that I took it there, but I know it went to the crime lab. I read its report and so forth. I'm aware of this.
Your department submitted it, right?
Correct.
And that matches up with Julie Jensen's log, right?
Unfortunately, when you had that up here, I didn't compare the postmark dates on there. If you could show me that, I think.
Sure, it's behind you. It's legible. You can see, and it might help you to compare in the lower right-hand corner, that it looks like there's probably like an evidence receipt, maybe from your department of 1397.
Yeah, this would be the crime lab number on here, and this is probably Jane Lewis's initials. And quite honestly, this kind of blends in with that. Is there a clearer postmark on there?
Oh, that's the copy I have.
I tend to think that this is probably a crime lab marking.
And that's about 1 week after there was the phone calls about the postcard, correct?
Could you direct my attention?
Yeah, the bottom of page 40, which is now back on the screen, the last line.
Yes.
And during your interview with Mr. Jensen that we watched yesterday,
Yes.
he told you that the only photos had been received in the mail very early on, correct?
I believe so.
Even when he worked at Bache, before he worked at Baird, correct?
I'm not aware where he worked before Baird, but
So you are unaware of any claim by Mr. Jensen that he was receiving pornographic photos in the mail from 96 to 98? True?
I believe so.
And this postcard that I had just shown you, that was analyzed by the crime lab, true?
Yes.
They compared that to Mr. Jensen's handwriting,
Yes.
and they determined that it was not Mr. Jensen's handwriting, true?
They came up with an inconclusive finding.
Well, they came up with the conclusion that it was probably not written by Mr. Jensen, right?
I believe it was, how they term it is inconclusive, but I think that would also be a fair statement.
But your attention to the second page of the report of Exhibit 20 and this paragraph. It says it was probably not written by Mr. Jensen or Mr. Tarika, right?
Correct.
At some point, you or Mr. Cosman, well, how many times did you meet with Mr. Jensen prior to December 3rd, 1998?
And again, I could have, but I don't recall ever meeting with Mr. Jensen prior to December 3rd, 1998.
So you weren't present during any conversations Mr. Cosman may have had with him?
I was not.
How many times did you meet with Julie Jensen prior to December 3rd, 1998?
I talked to her more on the phone than I did meet her in person. I would say 2, possibly 3 times that I met with her, and I probably talked to her 2, 3 times over the phone, if not more.
So it's just only something around 5 times that you ever had contact with Julie Jensen prior to December 3rd, 1998?
That would be a good estimate.
So you weren't the principal person investigating this harassment?
Correct.
And you never even spoke with Mark Jensen to find out what he had to say, right?
No, I spoke to Mark Jensen on the phone. I can recall a conversation we had, and this was after, with a private investigator. I recall speaking with him on the phone about this.
How many phone calls did you have with him?
I recall one, for sure. Possibly could have been more, but probably 1, 2 at the very most.
From looking at that log and from the information that you had received in this case, the leaving of the photos was sporadic, right?
Correct. Yes.
Mr. Jensen told you that he could not afford to have a private investigator watching his vehicle at all times, right?
Yes.
You also were told by Julie that Mark did not want to put up a camera in his office because he didn't want to alert people in his office about the problems that Julie had involving her affair with Perry Tarika, right?
Correct. I recall that.
You saw the photos that were collected in this case?
In which case, sir?
In the involving the harassment of the Jensens?
Yes, I did see some of them.
Those photographs were of Julie Jensen, or some of them were?
No, I don't believe any of them were.
Did Julie Jensen tell you that there were photos involving her?
Julie Jensen was convinced that she thought she was in the photos. I did not necessarily share that opinion.
Julie Jensen told you that the photos were of her, right?
Yes, I recall her saying that once, and I recall myself and Officer Cosman having a discussion that Julie thinks the photos are her in the photo.
Yeah. Is the answer yes, that Julie thought they were of her?
Yes, Julie did, yes.
When you wrote a report in this case, and I'll invite your attention to page 16, top of page 16 of your narrative report.
I'm familiar with that.
In that portion of the report, you're talking, you wrote this soon after December 3rd, 1998, right? Within a couple days?
Yes.
Yes. At that time, you don't say any, and what you're doing is you're recounting historically some of the problems they'd had with various photographs, right?
Correct.
In that paragraph, in a week or so, December 3rd, 1998, when you wrote it, you don't say anything about these photographs not depicting Julie Jensen, right?
Probably not. I recall that part of the report. I haven't read it here to refresh my memory completely, but I recall Julie Jensen telling me, Officer Cosman, that she thought the pictures were of her. I looked at some of the photos that Officer Cosman did recover. I didn't share that opinion. It was a similar looking person. Officer Cosman pointed out things in the photos, how he determined it wasn't her. So Julie Jensen had the opinion that it was her. However, I didn't have the opportunity like Officer Cosman did. He saw her much more frequently than I did. I didn't think they were of Julie. So Julie did think the photos were of her in the photos.
Did you look at the photos with Julie?
No, I did not.
Well, what you wrote in your report on page 16, within a week or so of December 3rd, 1998.
Can you be more?
Yeah, and I'm going to start the fourth line down from the top, halfway into that line, starting with when I spoke with Julie. See where I'm at?
Fourth line down from the top?
Yep.
Yes, I find you now.
All right. And what you wrote is, when I spoke with Julie last, she did mention to me that she and Mark had sexual problems, and she stated that the photos, which normally showed her having contact with the man's penis, is something Mark wanted to do, but she refused. Did I read that right?
Correct.
And what you say, when you describe the photos, you say that the photos normally showed her having contact with a man's penis, right?
Yes.
You don't say she thought showed her having contact with a man's penis, right?
No.
You describe the photos as normally showing her having contact with a man's penis, correct?
Correct.
You don't make any indication at that time that these were not pictures of Julie Jensen engaged in sex acts, correct?
It's not necessarily noted that way in the report. I think you're reading more into it, but I can tell you that I didn't share that belief, but that was her thoughts, not mine.
Can you show me any report that you made at the time saying that you did not believe these photos involved Julie Jensen?
No.
And if these photos were of her having sex, as she thought, then they had to originate with her or Mr. Tarika, right?
You're asking me to speculate. I don't know.
Julie indicated that that's why she was embarrassed by these photos, is because they involved her, right?
I recall her stating that or indicating that to Officer Cosman, yes.
She was a smart woman, true?
I think so.
She was certainly smart enough to know whether she was depicted in a photograph or not, wasn't she?
I would hope so.
But you disagreed with her as to whether it was her in the photographs?
I did, yes.
How many of these photographs did you see?
Yeah, this is back in the 90s. I don't recall exactly. I mean, they, as you pointed out, would come and go, and Officer Cosman would collect them. I know some of them weren't always turned over to Officer Cosman. And as part of our day, Officer Cosman would mention what's going on at the Jensens. I recall him showing me some of them. And I recall Officer Cosman showing one photo in particular that,
Well, I'm not asking, I mean.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And what I'm trying to find out is if there's any contemporaneous report in which you note that you didn't think these were of her.
I don't think that any written document is available that would satisfy your requirement.
And do you know of any document that tells me how many of these photos there were?
I'm not aware of one.
And how many photos did you look at?
I don't recall. Several.
Did you look at page 36 of, sorry, states, I don't know this exhibit number of the log?
I'm there.
And at the very bottom, and it's on the screen behind you, February 13th, 1996, Ron Cosman received a bag of evidence, right?
Correct.
Were those photographs?
I don't know.
Is that what you would guess that they were?
Well, I don't want the witness guessing.
Do you recall Mr. Cosman at some point having a bag of photographs?
I recall him having photographs, not necessarily a bag.
Now, you've searched throughout the Pleasant Prairie Police Department for any evidence of these photographs?
I did not.
Has somebody in your department looked for those?
Yes.
You understand that they've been requested by the defense since 2002, right?
I would have, yes, I would assume that.
All that was available was one single photograph, correct?
Yes.
There's no writing on that photograph? True.
I don't know.
Exhibit 197, it appears.
What was your question again?
Is there any writing on that photograph?
No.
Your department does not have evidence of a single photograph in your possession in which there's writing that we can look at, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
That photograph that you have there, Exhibit 197, no one tried to claim that was Julie, right? I mean, that doesn't look especially like Julie, right?
I don't know.
Well, Julie Jensen would never have said that photograph is of her. Fair to say?
Probably fair to say.
I mean, it's not like they're twins or something close to it. I mean, they have blonde hair, but other than that, there's not much similarity, true?
Yes.
In terms of reports that were written before Mrs. Jensen died, are there reports reflecting that these pictures really weren't of her?
I don't know.
Yesterday, you testified that while there was a trace on the phone, that no calls ever were received, correct?
No, there was a time, in fact, I investigated it, ran down a phone number, and I can't recall exactly if that was during a trace or not. It must have been, otherwise you wouldn't have had that information. But I think at one point, there was a call that came in while the trace was on.
You investigated that call from the residence of a Tina Thomas? Is
I
that right?
recall, yes, I recall that.
You recall where that residence was located?
It's in the western part of city of Kenosha, east of Highway 31.
And that was very close to where Mr. Jensen worked at the time, correct?
It was close, yes.
Within a few blocks?
I can't remember the exact address. I think it was more than a few blocks. But it was at most 5-6 blocks away.
Did you consider whether those people may have had any involvement in placing anything on Mr. Jensen's truck?
I'd have to look at the dates on that. That would have crossed my mind. Again, we're talking, I believe, 1996, 12 years ago. I'm not sure if I was aware of the things on Mark Jensen's truck at that point. So I don't know if I would have known that, that certainly would have rang a bell, because to get to their place where Mr. Jensen worked, you pretty much had to go past it to get there. I recall that being in the same neighborhood.
You knew where Mr. Jensen worked at the time?
I'm not sure if I did at the time or not.
You had had conversations with Mrs. Jensen, or perhaps Mr. Jensen, about a private investigator, right?
Yes,
When was that?
I don't recall.
But the idea of the private investigator was to watch his truck, right?
That is correct.
Or to put a video outside his window, right?
Yes,
So you had heard some information about harassment involving a truck, right?
yes.
So did you follow up or pursue the Thomas residence at all?
Yes, I went there and I spoke with the residents there.
And they denied any involvement.
Yes,
But there had been a call from their house, right?
yes. Well, that's what the records show.
Mark had reported that someone called his phone number and called him an asshole or something like that, right?
I don't recall those details. That very well could have happened. I just don't recall which incident it was. There were so many.
As a result of Mark's report that there had been a harassing phone call, you followed up with the trace, right?
Yes,
And in fact, there had been the call that Mark had claimed had happened at a particular time, right?
I don't recall if it was Mark or Julie that actually received the call, but I do recall the call being traced from the Jensen home, and I did follow up on it.
These photographs that were received, did you get fingerprints off them so you could try to match them to whoever was perhaps leaving them?
I didn't receive the photographs necessarily. I'm not aware of us taking any fingerprints of the photographs, at least not that I'm aware of.
You were a detective at the time?
Yes,
Officer Cosman was a patrolman?
yes,
Was that one reason he was talking to you about these matters?
probably.
Did you suggest to him that these things ought to be fingerprinted so you might be able to follow up?
And we could have fingerprinted them too. I just really don't recall specifically doing that. We might have. I mean, there was a point also that we strongly suggested or thought that Mark was actually leaving the photos. And I could see us probably doing a little bit more fingerprint, but I don't recall any specific issue or instance that we did do that.
Well, and if you go to page 32 of the log, okay, And at the bottom of the page, the last two entries, David Ellis, that was the private investigator.
It was, yes.
And then on April 18th, you received his, you had given his name, correct?
According to her, yes.
Right, and actually you can see on April 17, there was pictures left on Mark's truck at the office, right?
Well, just because it has it in the log does not mean necessarily that I was aware of it. If you recall from our video yesterday, I certainly pointed that out, that he many times received these things at work, but one never told me, and I pointed that out to him, and I impressed upon him that he needed to tell us that. So because it's in Julie's log, that's not necessarily the case here.
Well, let me
rephrase that I knew about it because it's in here, and
all right.
in fact, I'm not even sure that's the case.
All right, well, let's just look at the log, Mr. Ratzburg.
Very good.
April 17th, there's pictures found in Mark's truck, correct?
Yes.
On April 18th, you gave Julie Jensen the name of the investigator, Dave Ellis, right?
According to the log, yes.
Well, do you dispute Julie Jensen's log?
No, I do not.
Do you think that's accurate?
Well, I have some concerns because you mentioned or just stated that I supposedly knew this, and that's obviously not accurate. And but I don't dispute that she probably did contact Mr. Ellis, or I made her aware of that on that day.
Well, I didn't say you knew anything, Detective Ratzburg.
Yes, I think you have.
What? I might be suggesting it.
Yes,
I haven't said
I think
it.
you are.
On April 18th, you gave her the name of Dave Ellis of ESI as a private surveillance detective, correct?
Yes.
That could have related to pictures being left in Mark's truck on the office the previous day, right?
Could have.
And then the following day, there's a telephone call reported on this log that someone called, asked for Mark, and called them an ass or an asshole, right?
Yes.
Do you understand that to have, and that's April 19th of 96, right?
Yes.
Do you understand that to have been the call that you followed up with for Tina Thomas? Well, Detective, let me see if this refreshes your memory. Let me show you Defendant's Exhibit 262.
No, it's all right. Your question was? Because
Does this report on April 19th, 1996 involve Tina Thomas is my question?
I don't believe so.
Okay, let me show you Defendant's Exhibit 262. Is that your report involving your investigation of the telephone call that originated at the Tina Thomas residence?
Well, I don't believe so. I also look on, if you look on page 38 of Julie Jensen's log, it states Detective Ratzburg called with the results of subpoena, and there's quite a bit of notice in there about Tina Thomas. In fact, she writes down Tina Thomas, Stephen Daniels, Jenny Gunderson, and a few other names. And that's on June 3rd, 1996. What you're showing me here does have the Tina Thomas name on here, It is a report taken by Officer Cosman, investigated by myself.
What's the exhibit number in front of you?
Exhibit number D262.
And that's a report involving Tina Thomas, correct?
Well, yes, it is.
And it involves the follow-up on a telephone call received on what date, Detective Ratzburg?
On 4/19/96.
And what date is the call in the log when Mark was called the name?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to compare the two here, see which one's accurate, because in her log, it's 6/3/96. And of course, this here that you've shown me now is 2/13/96, both making reference to Tina Thomas. And I only recall going there once, so I'm concerned that either her log's not accurate or the police report is not accurate.
Okay, well, let's try to take this one step at a time and see if you can answer the questions, and then we'll try to get to the bottom of this. This is your report, correct?
Yes,
And page 2 shows that it involves Tina Thomas, correct?
yes.
I move Defendant's Exhibit 262 in there.
No objection.
You'll be received.
Okay, and we see here, before I take this off the screen, that the telephone call that was reported was on April 19th, 1996, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then here's page 2 of your report, Officer Cosman, Detective Ratzburg, how about that?
I've been called worse.
And it says that responding officer contacted Ameritech and requested phone numbers that occurred April 19th, 1996. That's the same day that we just saw in the log when Mark was called the name, right?
Correct.
And it says that Mr. Jensen had a prank phone call, correct?
Yes.
And then on June 3rd, 1996, that's the other day that you were talking about in the log, correct?
Yes.
You received a response, and that response you mean, by that response you mean the subpoena to Ameritech, right?
Yes.
And you got a phone number from Ameritech, right?
More than likely.
And that's why you followed up with Tina Thomas, correct?
Correct.
And the only mistake on here is that for some reason, your report is misdated at the top of February 13th when it could not have been February 13th, right?
Yes.
So do you now agree that the April 19th, 1996 call that I showed you does relate to Tina Thomas?
Oh, like I stated earlier, I don't believe it did. I believe the one here that's mentioned in her log is.
Well, what page are you talking about in that log now?
Be page 38.
And say, okay, take a look behind you before I put on page 38. It says on June 3rd, you received a response from Ameritech, right?
Yes, and
All right, now we go to page 38,
there we go.
and that date is June 3rd, right?
Yes.
And that's the date you called Julie Jensen with results of a subpoena for tracing phone call received 4/19/96, right?
Yes.
Calling Mark an asshole, right?
According, yes.
And then it goes on to say, came from low-income apartment on the west side of town. Woman didn't know any of us, but said other people used her phone. Detective asked us if knew any of the following, including Tina Thomas, right?
Yes.
So isn't it clear that the April 19th, 96 reference related to the Tina Thomas call?
Yes.
Okay. Is there That's right. There isn't any other date that's for Tina Thomas, right?
Objection's been asked and answered, and for the record, we'll stipulate it's been established.
Well, it would have been great if, 40 questions
Do you
ago.
want to accept the stipulation?
I don't need to. It's been proven.
All right, you don't want to accept it, okay.
Detective Ratzburg, I'll show you exhibits that were introduced yesterday, 255 and 256. So I guess I'll show you 256. And these are notes that were found in Julie Jensen's log, is that right? Is that right?
I'm unsure, her log or her phone book?
Well, you tell me.
I don't recall, I'm not absolutely sure.
It was found in one of her books. Is that fair to say?
That would be fair to say.
Do you want me to stipulate to where they were found? Because I pulled them out.
Well, what do you
It was pulled out of the log. The log book, the book containing this log, it was pulled out of there. I pulled it out myself yesterday.
Is that agreed?
I'll stipulate to that since the jury saw me do it.
So, and there it says in 256, Julie Jensen says, why does private detective ask about fingerprinting the photos ever done? Do you see that?
I do.
Is that a question that she had for you or Mr. Cosman?
Not that I recall.
You don't recall her ever expressing to you why the photos weren't fingerprinted?
I don't recall.
And she asks, why does Julie have to call the phone company and try to get their cooperation to check his phone records to see if our numbers show up? Right?
Yes.
Did she inquire of you or Mr. Cosman why you wouldn't get the phone records for Perry Tarica to see if they had the Jensen's number on it?
Objection, Your Honor. The question presumes the existence of a fact, not an evidence. To wit, that she had to do that in lieu of them. That could have been in lieu of Dave Ellis doing it. It's got nothing.
Rephrase your question.
No, she's saying, am I correct here that Julie is wondering why the private detective is asking why she would have to call the phone company to try to get their cooperation to check Perry's phone records, correct?
Yes.
And now my question is, did she ask you or Detective or Mr. Cosman ever to get Perry Tarica's numbers to see if they were being called, if the Jensens were being called from his number?
I don't recall.
And she wonders why the private detective is asking whether Mark's work and car phone records should be checked. Did she ever ask you about doing that?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever try to check his other phone numbers to see if he was calling his own home?
I know we were looking at phone records, and remember back in '98, it wasn't caller ID orientated as it is today. There were certain procedures you had to go through, and obviously we tried to set up some trap and traces, and I know Officer Cosman was working with her on all phone company records, trying to obtain who was making the calls.
My question is, did you check Mark's phone records to see if there were any calls to his own home?
I didn't.
Are you aware of anybody doing that?
I'm not aware of anything.
And that's something that could have been done, correct?
I'm not sure it wasn't done.
Well, if it was done, you're not aware of any calls from any of Mark's other phones being traced to his home phone, true?
True.
It says Mark's computers do not have photo generating capacity. Did you check on that?
Did not.
at the bottom, he says, he lied to Mark Hunter 5 years ago about being in contact. You understand the he being Perry Tarika, right?
Probably, yes.
You understood that he had lied to Officer Mark Hunter?
I believe so.
Denied being in contact with me until he got caught sending letter. Is that what you understood the situation had been?
Yes.
She also reports that he had a messy, nasty divorce. True?
True.
And Your Honor, I guess I'll object to any of this being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. The state had introduced this evidence to establish what Julie thought was taking place. But it's hearsay in terms of establishing the truth of the matter asserted.
There was no restriction on his admission yesterday.
I don't recall any limitation being placed on the evidence.
Well, it was not offered, Your Honor, to establish the truth of the matter asserted. It was being offered to
Was that the
establish...
condition of its offer?
That's what the state was offering it for, and now I now object to it being introduced as proof of the matter asserted. I believe the questions were, this appeared to be what Julie
These are
thought.
her state of...
Yeah, I'll tell you, quite honestly, this most recent statement, as I recollect, was testified to by the other individual.
In a messy, nasty divorce?
I think Mr. Tarika stated that, and maybe I'm wrong.
I don't remember. I'm not going to offer my recollection as...
Well, maybe I shouldn't offer mine either, but I'm going to overrule the objection.
Right, that's what Julie indicated in her own notes, right? That Tarika had a messy, nasty divorce?
Yes.
And she expressed concerns that maybe he had somebody helping him, right?
Yes.
The Tina Thomas call was not the only one that was received during a trace, true?
I believe so.
You believe that was the only one that was ever received during a trace?
No, I vaguely recall possibly another phone.
Well, let me ask you to turn to page 36, for example, of the log.
Yes.
And on the screen behind you, we can see it says from 11:15:95 to 12:01:95, the trace is on, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
And then there are calls that are reported on 11:14, 11:15, 11:20, 2 calls on 11:22, 11:24, and 11:26, correct?
Correct.
So there were calls received that were reported while a trace was on, right?
Appears that way.
Do you recall that with many of the calls, they could not be traced because they were out-of-area calls?
Yes.
Out-of-area would mean that they came from out of state, is that right?
Well, I'm not sure.
Do you know?
Well, as I think back to 98, I mean, we had certain things called a LATA back then. I mean, somebody could have been in a different area code, not necessarily out of state. I'm not sure what out of area means for 98.
I don't think it was. There's probably check to it. Okay.
Detective, Defendant's Exhibit 263 is a page out of the log, correct?
Correct.
It's a loose sheet,
Yes.
right? Two-sided.
Yes.
I move Defendant's Exhibit 263.
No objection.
Move your receipt back. To show you on the screen, Detective, this is the top half of the first side of 263. And mostly what is recorded are a lot of out-of-area calls, correct?
Yes.
Was it your understanding that this is what would show up on the caller ID?
Yes.
Julie Jensen was keeping track of these calls because she didn't know what they were about, right?
Yes.
And continuing the rest of the page, a lot more out-of-area calls, true?
True.
And then the flip side, a lot of out-of-area calls. Some of those out-of-area calls are hang-ups, is that right?
Yes.
She thought all those calls may be related to harassment?
Yes.
Keep this in the wall.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to put it. Just want to find it.
As you look through the log, there are quite a few other out-of-area calls, true?
Yes.
I take it that even if you had wanted to trace those calls, that apparently wouldn't have been possible because they're out of area?
I don't. We're going back to 96 and 97. I don't know.
Was it your understanding from the phone company that they could only trace local calls?
No.
Was it your understanding from the phone company they could trace out-of-state calls?
Would be my recollection, yes.
Well, why then would Julie Jensen have noted on that paper the problems with getting out-of-state phone records?
I don't know.
Do you know what out-of-area calls would have meant then?
I do not know.
And you can't say for sure the extent to which out-of-state calls might have been traced at that time?
I don't know.
Let's take a short break. Well, I guess it'll be a medium break. And please don't talk about the case.
All right.